Welcome into the Sun Belt Conference office. I'm Whitney Haworth, joined by Commissioner Keith Gill. It's an exciting time, as always, here at the Sun Belt headquarters, so it's just time for us to catch up a little bit, and obviously you're about to be 10 months on the job, so what's your tenure been like thus far, and what's been maybe some of the most fun things you've gotten to do?
Yeah, it's been great. It's gone really fast, so I feel like I just got here yesterday, but it's really been fun getting to know all the student athletes, getting to know the campuses. I took a tour and went to all the schools when I first started, and I learned a lot. And then we had an unbelievable football season, so it was nice to start off with 4 victories over Autonomy 5 schools by Sun Belt teams, our first CFP ranking with App State, and so it's been a great start.
And for you, this is a very important month for all of us, to be honest. It's Black History Month. When you hear those terms, what does that mean to you, and maybe what's your first initial thought?
My initial thought is I really just think about my parents. I'm really fortunate based on the sacrifices of my parents and their generation. My parents grew up in Jim Crow, South Carolina, and so a lot of the opportunities that I had, they had no chance to have. And but they sacrificed and they spent their whole lives trying to make sure that myself, and I have an older brother and older sister, went to college. And so I think that when I think about Black History Month, I think about the sacrifice of my parents and people like them to really make the world a better place for people like me and folks following kind of behind them.
And as we celebrate Black History Month, you have paved the way in intercollegiate athletics. You made history when you became the commissioner of the Sun Belt Conference, first African American commissioner of an FBS conference. What does that mean to you, and how have you worked to get to this point, and how do you hope something like that brings, hope to others?
Yeah, I think about it in terms of, so when I was growing up in the business, there were a lot of people of color who were my mentors. So Rochelle Collins and Stan Johnson, they were my first kind of bosses at the NCAA when I was an intern. And so I certainly think about them all the time. But also, like, when I used to go to the NCAA convention, I used to see like Gene Smith, AD at Ohio State, or Charles Harris, who at the time was the AD at Arizona State. People of color, they made me realize that I might have had the opportunity to get into the same role that they had. And so I hope that I can just provide kind of that, inspiration for folks to say, well, if Keith can do it, then there's an opportunity for me as well.
And as you've grown up, you alluded to it, you played football at Duke, you worked at the NCAA, you've worked at a number of universities. How have you seen diversity and inclusion advance and get better and become a more talked about topic?
Yeah, I think back to, and I'm dating myself here, but back in 1994 when I got my first job at the NCAA, that was through one of their diversity programs. It was an internship program that was specifically for people of color and women. And so to see how that program, one, has helped people kind of get into the business like myself, and how the NCAA and colleges and universities with their internship programs, with their focus on diversity, have really expanded it, has been amazing. Like when I go to the NCAA convention or I go to the NACDA convention now, the number of women and people of color that I see in positions kind of that are rising through the ranks, and then also leadership positions, is amazing. And so you can see that there's been a demonstrable change because people have really focused on it. People have been intentional. And so, yeah, the numbers continue to rise. We aren't where we need to be, and we need to continue to do better to make sure that we're finding opportunities for women and for people of color, but it continues to get better, which is exciting to see.
And you just touched on, diversity and inclusion doesn't just adhere to African Americans. It's women, it's the younger generation, older generation. There's a number of minorities in there. So, what's maybe a piece of advice that you tell others to know that you can have a seat at the table? It doesn't matter what you look like or your age or your gender, etc.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's one of the things that I would say is just do the best job you can at the job you have. That's something that's advice that I've always been given. That's something I've always tried to do, is do the best job that I can where I am and not really think about what happened before or after. And I think if you do that, good things will happen. I think that one of the things is you just have to know that life and your profession can be frustrating, and it really is about how do you get up off the mat, how do you keep fighting forward, how do you keep getting better, and if you do that, good things are going to happen to you.
And as you look around the Sun Belt Conference, when you first started back in May, you first had a diversity and inclusion summit. How have you seen the conference and its institutions kind of take take the lead in talking about diversity and inclusion and implementing it on their campuses, or implementing it even more than they already were?
When we talked about the Diversity Summit with our CEOs, I was so impressed by how interested they were in the information that we talked about, in the numbers that we have here. So we're being very intentional about it in terms of trying to develop programs and make sure that we identify opportunities for women and for people of color. So right now we're putting together some baseline information and beginning to kind of track those numbers in a way that maybe we haven't in the past. And our schools are really committed to making sure that they find opportunities for employment in their ranks. And so that's been really a good thing to see, and it's been fun kind of working with that, and I can't wait to kind of see how that plays out over the years.
Well, Keith, I certainly appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. Obviously, Black History Month, diversity and inclusion are not always the easiest topics to discuss in our society, but certainly an important one, so I really appreciate you joining me.
Great. Thanks for having me.